All right, so we're going to gavel in. The time is 9:06. My name is Rugi Canizares, for the record, Vice President of the Oregon Mortuary and Cemetery Board. And pursuant to the Public Meeting Statute, ORS 192630, I now would like to start the public session. And so if Mr. Christopher Ryan could please do a roll call for us, that would be great. I appreciate you.
You bet. We'll start with President Gaskill. As we know, President Gaskill is running late, so I'm making a note of that. He is not currently present, but should be joining later. Vice President Canizares.
Here.
Secretary Treasurer Felton. Nancy is currently not present. Member Collins.
Present.
Member Harris.
Present.
New member Holly Houston. For the record, Holly is not currently present. Member Loveland. For the record, Member Loveland is not currently present. Member Mackenzie Tucker.
Here.
Thank you. Member Nagus.
Here.
Member Pacheco.
Present.
Member Porter.
Present.
AAG McCracken.
Present.
Director Dresselhaus.
Present.
For the record, Staff Member Brown is excused. I, Staff Member Ryan Christopher, am present. Staff Member Hune is excused. Staff Member Itkin is excused. Staff Member Kenny.
Present.
And for the record, Staff Member Little is excused. And that does conclude the roll call.
And I'd like to confer to the to the staff and to legal counsel if we have quorum.
Yes, we have quorum.
Thank you. I appreciate you. All right,
And-
so just a brief
And
comment.
Rugi, sorry, just you
Yes.
might want to welcome our RAC chair, Serena Traxler, to the meeting as well.
Yes, I'd be more than happy to do that. I would like to just welcome everybody and thank you for reminding me. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving and looking forward to the holidays. And remember that we celebrate for us to be together. And this would be maybe our last meeting before the holidays, and wish you all well. So I would like to make public comments open, and I'd like to acknowledge that we do have a member of the public, the current chair of our Rules Advisory Committee. And I welcome you. And if you could please state your name for the record, and we welcome you.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very honored to be here. Serena Truxler is present.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask staff if there's anybody in the public that has signed in electronically or virtually by phone, so that we can acknowledge them and allow them to go into any public comments that they may have.
Does not appear we have any other members of the public present at this time.
Okay, for the record, do let me know, please, Mallory, if anybody chimes in so that we can acknowledge them. So going through the agenda, there is one agenda items, general discussion and action items. There is administrative rulemaking update, apprenticeship requirements, and additional RAC recommendations. So let's go ahead and open that table. Is there anybody who is willing to do that presentation on that final document?
Yes, this would be me. So I'll start with just a committee overview, just to jog everyone's memory. At the July board meeting, we were given instruction to put into effect a temporary rule for the apprenticeship requirements. We had some public comments that were concerned about the requirements potentially hindering the ability for apprentices to complete their apprenticeship. So we drafted a temporary rule and put that into effect. It's been in effect for about 6 months. It will expire on December 27th of this year. And in the meantime, we were also instructed by the board to develop a rules advisory committee. So we sent out a call for volunteers to all of our licensees. The committee consisted of a variety of our licensees, including Serena Trexler, who's here today, representing our NOR facility, our only licensed NOR facility in Oregon, Renew. Also on the committee was Becky Dowd, Twyla Bruni, Marcus Terry, Edith Asham, Adrian Taylor, Sherry Zemke, and Michael Turner. And then myself and Ryan were representatives of the board staff, and Angela Mackenzie Tucker was the representative for the board. So the committee was charged to review the rule related to apprenticeship requirements. We met 4 times over the course of September to November, and we are now ready to present the rule for approval. So included in your electronic packet on your iPads was the temporary order, which is kind of how we adjusted the rule based on board direction from July. And then also in the packet is the new rule that is proposed by the committee. So I can also share my screen if that is helpful to anyone, if you'd like me to pull it up so we can all look it over at the same time.
And for the record,
That would be great.
I feel like I want to mention that my understanding was that the direction came about during the April meeting.
Oh, April meeting. It went into effect July 1st, I believe.
Correct.
Thank you for that correction, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Yes, as Mallory is trying to set that up, I just want to frame this under the advice of our legal counsel that the whole process of, and again, just for people who have not done this before, the Rules Advisory Committee is as such. They are an advisory committee that it is incumbent upon us, the board members, to approve or modify it. That the final decision is us, the board members, whether we take it collectively as a whole or parse out certain concerns. And being a public member, I would have to defer to my professional colleagues. But again, just the whole process is that it's not an automatic, not that we're discrediting the work, but our role as the board is to make sure if we are uncomfortable or have any clarifying questions, this would be the chance to ask whether or not there are certain concerns, and that we have to end up with a vote to accept or modify as presented. And am I misstepping, legal counsel, about what
No, you're
terms of our role?
absolutely correct. Following the presentation, the board gets to decide if there's anything additional that needs to be tweaked to make this work for the board and board staff so that implementation is as easy and seamless as possible, and so that the rule is as easy to interpret for both members of the public and the board. You are absolutely correct.
And there are some instances where in which we might have to defer some rule changes recommendations. That is okay. And we can move forward with the others. It again
Correct.
does not have to be in its entirety. So again, I'm not legal counsel, but just because this is not my first rodeo, I just basically want to give the fundamentals so that we can frame this so that there's no preconceived notion that this has to be accepted and this is just a rubber stamp. And again, I'm not discrediting the work of the Rules Advisory Committee, but that is the process. I would like to
Yes.
acknowledge that I think Mallory raised her hand twice even. And
Oh.
there is also Angela, so I'd like to acknowledge that. So go ahead.
Really quickly, we just have someone joining by phone, so I was going to admit them, and if we could take a pause, I think, are they still waiting to be let in, or they might have? I just wanted to pause and see who they were, but it looks like they are no longer in the lobby. So once they come back in, I'll admit them, and then we'll just take a pause to acknowledge.
Okay, and I'd
entering
like to
via
acknowledge Angela. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to take a moment to thank all the volunteer members of the Rule Advisory Committee. They really did tremendous work in sitting in on their meetings and reading through their minutes. There was a lot of really robust conversation. The level of detail they reviewed everything was really, really profound. And I was very impressed by the work that was happening. I also appreciated that oftentimes during their conversations, there was a lot of kind of like a micro focus on different areas of the state, micro focus on like, how would this impact a consumer, the community? But then they were very skilled and then kind of coming back to driving all that conversation to what is the desired outcome. And they were very clear in that the desired outcome was making sure that individuals who go through an apprenticeship in the state of Oregon come out the other side knowing all the skill sets that they need to be successful in being a funeral director or embalmer. So again, the level of professionalism from this committee was really inspiring. And I just thank everybody for their hard work and dedication, because I know some of that stuff was a little tedious to go through, but it was good work.
Thank you, Angela. And we did have someone join via phone. If you wouldn't mind just letting us know.
Rob.
Oh, hi, Rob.
Rob.
Welcome.
Thanks, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Rob. And so I can technically defer to you. We started the meeting.
Go ahead if you could, because I'm not at work yet. I was called away. I've got to pick up somebody. So if you can go ahead and just lead the meeting, that would be great.
All right. I appreciate you. Just let me know when you want me to defer to you so we can record
Thank
that. Okay.
Okay.
That being said, Mallory, I'm giving you the floor and go ahead.
Yes, I will go ahead now and share my screen to show you the document, the final document that the committee is recommending the board review and vote on today. Can you all see this? Do you need me to zoom in on my screen at all?
And board members should also have this document as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And this is Katrina McCracken, counsel to the board. Ms. Kenny, will yourself or Ms. Drexler be discussing with the board? I think it said there were additional recommendations from the RAC in addition to this.
Yes, the additional recommendations are to define the requisite competencies for apprentices in rule as directed in ORS 692-190. So you'll see in the rule that competency requirements are to be included in the apprentice's logbook, but to date, those have not been defined. So that's the main additional recommendation from the committee to the board, is that either the board define those competencies or potentially create an additional RAC to look into those as well. Because we had a temporary rule in place, this committee was a little bit under a time crunch to make these edits. So if there was additional time, I think they would have dove into those competencies a bit more. But because we have a temporary rule expiring at the end of this month, they wanted to get this completed to present to the board as soon as possible.
And in that vein, if I could add a recommendation to consider later, not for changing today unless the board wants to. I really appreciated the definition of what arrangement means and supervision means. I think it would be really helpful to the board if there was also a definition of what directly involved means and direct participation, because those are the two things that will be argued about most if anything ever goes to hearing, and having a definition for those as well would be very helpful.
So I think the biggest thing that the committee determined that is changing from both the temporary rule and kind of leaning back towards the way that the rule was originally written is that the committee believed apprentice embalmers should perform at least 35 embalmings. The way this was originally written, it was assist in 35 embalmings. So there was a lot of questions about if setting features and different things like that counted. The committee really wanted to make it clear that a embalmer apprentice should have completed 35 arterial embalmings by the time they move forward. So that I think was one of the major defining parts of this rule. And then as Katrina mentioned, supervision, I believe, was defined in the temporary rule, and then the committee took it further to define what an arrangement means as well for the funeral service practitioner apprentices.
So I would just like to kind of jump in and give a few thoughts as a licensee for this. And that, if you can recall, we had public testimony where the question was really asked, can we define what needs to be recorded in that apprenticeship log? You know, the setting of features versus arterial embalming, what counts as a case for like an FSP log. I personally feel like the language that the committee has presented takes something that was very kind of nebulous and vague and does move it towards black and white without making it so pedantic that you're confused what counts. I think this would translate well into funeral homes across the state, and that yes, teaching an embalmer how to set features is an important part of their apprenticeship, but it doesn't count for that 35 cases. And I think that work will still continue, but it creates this kind of threshold of this is what has to be accomplished during the apprenticeship to count it. And it does define it in a way that I personally feel is very palatable. I don't know if any other licensees would like to comment on that and their feeling after they read through the proposal.
Did somebody try to raise their hand? It came in one. All right.
It was me. I lowered it. Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Ms. Trexler has her hand raised though.
Yes.
As a person that went through my apprenticeship rather, recently, I think that the verbiage really solidifies things as arterial embalming. So not just, disinfecting and, like you were saying, Angela, making a kind of a vague statement. I have found, and being on the board and having those conversations with the other licensed practitioners, really seeing all of the different views really solidified it for me, and I like the verbiage a lot.
I have a question for the professional members. Is everybody happy and can live with the number 35? And again, I'm not biased at all. I'm completely clueless as the member of the public, right? So my role here is 35. Do you think 35 protects the public, or less, more? And I'm just opening it up there for discussion, right? Because that is a benchmark we're using. And I just want to make sure that everybody is happy and can live with that number.
I feel comfortable with the 35 as long as we maintain the minimal time frame that they have to serve at least for a year, because I think they garner all the rest of that experiences as well. I also think too, with the clarification for the FSP, for that, what counts is the apprentice sitting through the entirety of an arrangement and then executing the service. I think was really smart what they did. There are kind of some known practitioners who really don't allow their apprentices to do actual funeral director work during their apprenticeship, and then they count going to services. And then we have somebody who's a licensed funeral director who's really never done arrangements before. So I think it closes kind of a little bit of a weird loophole that wasn't being, I think, wildly abused across the board, but there were known instances of it. So I think the number is fine. But I guess I would defer to Craig or Rob if they have comments on that.
Now is the time to speak up.
No, I concur.
Sorry, I was
Okay,
on
looks-
mute. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, looks like
It's-
Melissa would
it's
like
good.
to speak. All right.
I'm just going to say, for somebody that's not directly involved with the funeral practice and stuff, I think a 35 becomes a realistic number. Just thinking the demographics of our state as a whole. 35 may be super easy to get in more metropolitan areas, and may take longer in the more rural areas, but it is a definitive, this is what you need to do. And I did like the language where there was some to go back and forth and, collaborate or to help get them that it kind of addressed some of those issues. So my hat's off on that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Kenny, you have raised your hands.
Yeah,
Your
just a
hand.
quick note from the committee. They kind of went back and forth on the number of embalmings, and there was representation from folks in more rural areas, and there was some concern about that. And what the committee settled on was that if these apprentices want to get licensed, then they should be networking to try to get those embalmings in. And again, they only want folks entering the industry who are serious about completing these requirements. So that's kind of what the committee settled on there. And then also, they did remove that the supervisor must be working and located at that language. So that opens it up for these apprentices to travel a bit more and work under work at a different facility under the guidance and the direction of their supervisor, but they don't have to be directly located. So that helps folks in more rural areas meet these requirements as well by traveling out to the more metropolitan locations.
And I think there was conversations too, Mallory, about maybe this is an opportunity to reach out to the OFDA to see if they can maybe help with that type of like a hosting, like almost like a foreign exchange student exchange of, maybe a director needs to come into a busier area of the state for a couple of weeks to get cases in. And I think the OFDA would probably be open to that, but that might be something that we want to add to a further agenda item for us to discuss.
Yes, and just to note that all apprentices have 48 aggregate months to complete this requirement. It's not limited to a year. I think there was some confusion in the industry about how long apprentices have, and that's additional direction from the committee is that they want OMCB staff to make this very clear as far as the timelines required to complete all of these requirements, and that we'll be sharing this out once we've completed the rule and everything. It'll be shared out via newsletter, and we'll be posting very clear information on our website as well as far as what the requirements are and how long apprentices have to complete them.
I'd
And
like
if
to
I can-
acknowledge Craig.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The 30, maybe I didn't hear this, but the 35 arrangements, does online email, does that constitute an arrangement, or do they have to be in person?
It's 25 arrangements for FSP apprentices.
Okay, sorry.
All right,
In
and then I
person-
acknowledge. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In person or online, or is there a delineation?
There's no delineation. So for the committee determined that arrangement means funeral services or final dispositions for at-need persons fully from the initial contact through the disposition of remains. So it doesn't specify in person or kind of virtual or digital
thank you.
communication.
And Ryan, I do want to acknowledge you, but I think legal counsel raised her hand prior to you. Go ahead, Katrina.
Thank you, Vice Chair Canizares. I just wanted to check on two things. The aggregate months 48, does that mean the idea was that the apprentice the trainee, if they needed to take a break for some reason, can take a break. I know the next subsection is very clear on that subsection 9, but I just want to understand the play between subsection 11. Nope, hang on, let me find the right one. Yes, 9 and 10. I just wasn't clear. So 9 is the aggregate 48 months, and then 10 is notwithstanding 9, the board can consider a request for extension. So someone within the 48 months could have to step away for a little while, but they could come back, but it might be that they need an extension, and that brings in the next subsection. Is that right?
Ryan, do you mind speaking to that?
I think that is essentially correct. And that was actually one of the things I was going to draw attention to, is that aside from the 48 aggregate months, that notwithstanding that requirement, an apprentice can, or it says the board may consider a request for extension of the apprenticeship period for reasonable and extenuating circumstances beyond the control of the trainee. So this would give folks in a rural area who perhaps were unable to get the 35 embalmings within a 48-month period, they could express that due to circumstances beyond their control, they need longer. And so it's not even limited to 48 months, but yes, 48 aggregate months is, I think, designed in that way to give folks who are wanting to pursue school and maybe start their apprenticeship and then go to school. It just gives them a little bit more flexibility to not have a rigid 48, and they built it into, say, aggregate, I think, very intentionally.
And I had a second question, and then I will give back the floor. I just wanted to ask, in the definition of supervision, so this is 3C, for the purpose of this section, supervision means, and then it says only after receiving direction from a licensed funeral service practitioner. So I wanted to understand whether and I appreciated the comment earlier about encouraging people to host a director. And I assume that the idea there is to host a director so that they can bring their apprentice and be in a busier facility where they can do more cases. So the only after receiving direction, that doesn't mean that the supervisor doesn't need to be present when these arterial, it's not that they can give direction and then walk away and leave the trainee to do it. The idea is that they're there, present in the same facility, or not. I see Angela shaking her head. I was wondering if somebody could just so that we're all clear as we're going into this, especially me.
Yeah, I think the language is kind of trying to define that kind of craziness of if the apprentice is maybe sent to a neighbor funeral home, let's say, they're going there for the direction of their preceptor, and they're going to say, hey, you're going to be working, with Rob, and you're going to work on the embalming cases that he has going on there. But that would be the direction given by the preceptor. I don't think the language was intended that then the preceptor then physically has to be present for those cases. But Mallory, correct me if I'm wrong from the committee notes.
You're correct. Yeah, that used to read that the preceptor or the supervisor must be working and located at the same facility, and the committee decided to remove that language to open it up for them to say, okay, you are my apprentice. I'm sending you under my direction to go work at this other facility, and let them kind of travel. But at that
other facility, they would be supervised that day by the licensee at that facility.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Apologies for all the questions.
It's a good clarification to make.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, this was written very specific. I think Katrina identified it because if it meant to say it would be under the direction of the supervising FSP, it would say that. So it says after receiving direction from a licensed funeral service practitioner. So that makes a distinction of it doesn't have to be their supervisor. It can be someone else, and that's the purpose, to potentially farm out, or if someone needs to make up some embalmings who are in more rural areas, could come to maybe a more populated area that has more embalming opportunities. And as long as they're under the overall supervision of the FSP, their supervisor giving that direction. And as long as they're under the direct supervision of a licensed FSP or an embalmer, depending on the situation, that then they're complying with the requirements. And
Thank you.
it was
That's
purposed
really helpful.
to expand the reach there and the allowability. So these tasks can be completed like Melissa has brought up in certain areas that's a little more challenging.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comment? And I want to emphasize with the public members, obviously the professional members have a lot of input, but I also want to acknowledge the public members if they have any clarifying questions or any concerns.
I don't know.
Wow, this easy group. Go ahead.
I did just want to add that in my experience, each embalmer I have embalmed with, I've learned something from. So I think opening this up and having apprentices learn from multiple different sources is a really good opportunity to get really great embalmer practitioners out there in the world and get a variety of, like in those rural areas, you might not have as many different types of arrangements. So going to a different facility in a more populated area, you're going to get more of a variety and learn a lot more from that.
Thank you.
And this is Rob. Can I speak, sir? I think this is a really, really good start. I do like a little bit more defining things like Katrina said in a few areas, but right now this is so much better than it was, and I think this is good.
Which leads to the next. Go ahead, Rob. I'm sorry.
I just as a final comment, and what Angela said is absolutely right when it comes to embalming. I could still learn stuff from people that embalm, newer embalmers, because they do things a little different and they have a different technique or something, so it's always good to watch other embalmers no matter when.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Rob. So there's a couple of things here that's in my mind, and I was trying to settle myself, so I did not track. But Katrina, I think there were 3 that needs further clarification, definitions, right? And
yes,
if,
and it
and
doesn't
again,
have
I'm
to
just
be
trying to organize it.
today. Yeah.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
But I want to identify that. I counted 3, and if staff could jot this down, because I'd like to direct the ship that way and then ask questions. For those 3 things, again, help me out, please. One was supervision, right?
It's directly involved. And I think it could probably be combined with direct participation. I think they're intended to mean the same thing. And maybe we can just have one term and define it once would be my thought.
That's one.
And then the other piece was what we were just discussing, really. It's the only after receiving direction. I think it would be wonderful if some of the great discussion that we just had could appear in the rules so that it's really clear to people that the intent of the board is to have that broadening and allow, under the direction your supervisor says, today, this week, I need you to go from Boardman to, somewhere with a bigger city, and you're going to be under this person while you're there, and you're to take their direction, and you're going to be able to do 10, let's say, arterial things while you're there because they're a big city and they have more clients. I just think if we could get a little bit of that into the rules so that it's clear, or the alternative to that would be if the board wanted to do an FAQ and post that on the website that provides, additional definition. But I do think it's better in the rule, and then the FAQ can just give some examples and that help clarify.
Okay, and then there was one more. I'm missing one more. I counted 3.
Right. It was the directly involved and the direct participation were the first two. And then I was saying, I think they're actually maybe the same thing. So, but those would be, it would be that direct involvement, direct participation, and the only after receiving direction. Those are the three.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Canning.
Also, the committee's recommending that the board also define competencies
Yes,
as
yes.
they appear in the logbook.
Okay. So,
And I would second that recommendation strongly.
Yes. So we have 4, and I would like to direct the board whether or not this is the time and place to wordsmith some, all, or, and again, please direct me, Ms. McCracken, whether we could do this. We could throw it back to the Rules Advisory Committee to further discuss and define that. So that's our choice, how we want to move forward. I personally
because
am
of the
written
time,
in
sorry.
stone. Yeah. So because I am personally, everything should be in rule. An FAQ, I think, might add. I think if it's clear in rule, is more preferred than an FAQ, and like one of those, right? And so I don't know if, and then if we collectively, I'm just trying to chart the course, want to give it back and delegate the same rack, right? Because sometimes their job is not done yet, right? If that's the direction we want, we're leaning to, and we can have an open discussion with that. Is, do we choose all, choose some? Is it, are some of these definitions, and again, I'm going to defer to the professional members, are some of them really easy to define that we can whittle it down to maybe 2 or 3 that, or 2 or 1 that needs further clarification that requires a Rules Advisory Committee? And so I want to get a sense with that. And I'm, again, leaning on the professional members. So I'm opening it up for discussion. And then you wanted to say something.
I was just
Katrina.
going to mention timelines because this was a temporary rule. And so it will expire in December. And I would have to agree with your comments and President Gaskell's comments that this temporary rule is a vast improvement over what was there before. And I really commend the committee for their work on this. I think you've done marvelous work. So I think my recommendation to the board would be to go ahead and make the temporary rule permanent, but then have the RAC committee continue to work on the pieces that were identified today. And, you know, then you can adopt it at a regular, those amendments at a regular board meeting later. But I think, Mallory, if you could speak to those timelines, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, so the temporary rule will expire December 27th, and it will revert back to the original way that the rule was written, which is actually more closely aligned to what the committee decided versus what was in the temporary rule. If you all recall, the temporary rule actually changed the number of embalmings from 35 to 15. So we're more in line with how the rule was originally written. If the board decides to approve this rule before the end of December, the timeline would be, it has to be noticed in the bulletin. So I could get it in for January 1st to be in the bulletin. It has to be in there for a month, and then it would go into effect February 1st. So as of right now, if the board votes to approve this rule as is, the temporary rule will end December 27th and will revert back to the original rule for about a month and 3 days, and then this rule will go into effect February 1st.
All righty.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I would like to hear input from the board members, and maybe just, we're not voting, okay, but where are we leaning in terms of these 4 areas of definition? Do we want to wordsmith it right now? I'm not going to tell you what my opinion is because I want to land the plane. Or do we want to accept the rule as presented? And we don't have to reveal anything to the public, right? We accept it, but we can turn around and give charge to the Rules Advisory Committee to do some more wordsmithing and present it to us, and we can do that in the board. And then I do have some questions about the process, right, in terms of the timelines. but I just want to get a sense where we're at, because if somebody has a burning desire to wordsmith and do committee work, I'm game, but the majority rules here. So I'm just going to do a draw strings in turn. We're not voting, right? But just to get a feel, I'm going to word it this way. Does anybody have this strong, compelling feeling to do the wordsmithing on behalf of the Rules Advisory Committee, or defer to the Rules Advisory Committee? Now is your chance if you want to be inspired to do ground level work. Very good.
Defer.
Nobody has raised their hands or concerns. Did anybody say they want to do it? Because I can delegate, because remember, I'm the acting president at this point. Be aware. I'm just letting you know. Be careful how you volunteer things. Anybody has any concerns or do? Go ahead.
Rob. I think it's good as it is for us to put it into rule and then defer.
All right. Thank you. And anybody has any concerns, please voice it now or your turn. Okay, very good. I do have a question. We can announce this publicly immediately today for public comment. It does not have to be on written form, correct? We can email this so that as of effective today, we have 30 days, correct? For public comment? Please somebody chime in. Am I recollecting the rule?
It has to be put into the Secretary of State bulletin. So, and I will have to basically go through the Secretary of State website to put it in, and it will be added at January's bulletin. It'll be in there for a month, and then it will go into effect February 1st.
Okay, so
I don't think we need to open it up for hearing, right,
it has
Katrina?
to be on the Secretary of State does it on the beginning of each month, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, the deadline to get it in is the last day of the month for the next month, and then it has to be noticed for a full month before it can go into effect. But Katrina, can you chime in? Do we need to have a public hearing on the rule as well? And what's the timeline for that?
Well, public comment, right? To open it up for public comment.
So, sorry, Mallory, remind me, you're making a temporary rule permanent or?
No, so the temporary rule will expire on December 27th instead.
Right.
And the way that this is written by the committee is very different from the temporary rule. So we're not going to be pushing that temporary rule to become permanent. Well, basically,
okay, so you're opening a brand new rulemaking. So it would have to be published publicly through the Secretary of State rulemaking website. Okay. And yes, that would be a minimum of a month, right?
Right. And then I would have to host a hearing or
a hearing and
during that month for public comment.
And then it would come back to the board to vote on with whatever recommendations came out of the public comment period as well. So there might be time in there. I don't know what the RAC's ability is, and we haven't actually asked Ms. Trexler if she's willing to keep serving on the RAC or not. But if she is, it may be possible that those additional, comments could be brought forth in the public comment period from the RAC committee too. And it could all then come to the board as a final package, and there would only be the need for the one publication.
If there are edits to the rule from what we post in the bulletin and comments come in on the hearing and they want to make changes, do I then have to repost it to the bulletin? Does that delay it a month?
Well, what I'm wondering is if the RAC's comments, what we're asking the RAC to go back and do, if that could come in during the comment period. I don't know why it couldn't, then it wouldn't delay it.
Okay.
Or would it be more efficient?
To any comments?
How about take 2 bites and accept the rule as written, right? And the only reason I'm being sensitive, because we want to accept that, get that bite. And the only reason why I'm concerned is trying to get the RAC serving in the RAC prior during the holiday season would be a tall charge to get it done during the public comment, right? And then I'm looking at the board meeting. When is the board meeting? In January? And do we need to reschedule that so that it's timed? You follow what I'm saying?
To
Do we need an
happen
extra
after
meeting?
so you can adopt
Correct.
the rule at that board
Can we
meeting.
just doing exactly? Can we do it in one fell swoop? So I'm really thinking ahead, trying to be efficient with the board, being sensitive to people's times, right? Is if this is going to be January 1st and then we have to finalize it at the end of January, I think we're a little bit ahead in our schedule. Am I making sense what I'm trying to say here? We might end up needing an extra meeting. Can we just do it in one meeting by maybe rescheduling the January meeting? And maybe I'm not making sense, but
No, you
the way I'm
are,
looking,
and I'm just trying to look and see when the board's January meet, was it the 21st? Is that right? January 21?
is that ample time? Because we have to give them X amount of days, correct?
I'm looking to Mallory because she's much
Well,
more
if
familiar
it's
with those
filed
rules than I
January
am.
1, it has in the bulletin, it has to go for the full month. So if there's something that's desired to be done after that formal process, we would probably have to I mean, if the intent is to have the board meeting, our planned board meeting to fall in line to discuss this, most likely we would have to do it sometime in February. I think that's what you're asking, right, Rugi? If
That
we
is
want
correct.
to do it all at once, it would most likely need to be done sometime in February.
Yes.
Because this posting has to be set like in public
30
notice
days.
for 30 days right in the bulletin. So there's
Correct.
nothing that can be done during that time. I mean, there can be, I guess, in the background, but formally, everyone has 30 days to review that in the bulletin. All proposed rulemaking is in that bulletin. So just to answer that question, if we were to try to align that with our board meeting, which
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's what people want to do
going
or
back,
not.
Yep, correct. So going back on track, it looks like we are going to move forward and approve this as presented. And in the group, please get ready to make a motion because me cannot make the motion running this meeting, and somebody will second. And then we're going to do that, and we're going to vote on that.
Before you do
Go
that,
ahead.
it looks like both Ryan, Christopher, and Mallory Kenny have some comments they need
Yes,
to.
correct. And I acknowledge that. And then the next thing that we need to talk about is whether or not we want to do it in two separate meetings. One has to be completely 30 days, which means our January becomes a February meeting, or take two meetings. With that being said, something to reflect on, I would like to, I didn't see who raised their hands first, and you two can just take turns. So go ahead, Ryan and Mallory.
I wanted to just point out that changing the January board meeting may have an impact on our investigator, Mary Ann. Her cases are on a pretty strict deadline for when they need to be presented to meet certain marks. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. And then before I yield, I also wanted to just provide a thought of my own and a recommendation as it related to arrangements for apprentice funeral service practitioners. And I would like, if the RAC were to reform, that they also consider what we would want the outcome of an apprentice funeral service practitioner to be as far as their capacity to meet with people, to make arrangements. It was brought up by Member Collins that does an arrangement virtually count as an arrangement? And I'm wondering if the industry wants people who only can meet with people virtually to be given a license as a funeral service practitioner, or would they need to have some sort of indication that they met with people, they actually made arrangements in the physical form as well? So I'll yield there.
Noted. Thank you. Mallory?
So I believe that we won't have to reschedule the January board meeting. If I put this into the bulletin January 1st, we could schedule the hearing for potentially the week before the board meeting and get public comment at that. And I'm just going through my email from someone at Secretary of State, and for my last rulemaking, they advised me that I do not need to start the process over again when you're making changes to the rule language based on testimony or public comment received. So we can incorporate changing language based on feedback, based on the hearing, and update the rule. And then the board could approve it at the January board meeting. And then if anything came in the last 10 days of January, then I would reach out to you, but we could have the hearing before the board meeting. And I highly doubt folks will reach out outside of the hearing to provide edits to the rule or comments in that way.
So what I'm hearing is we can keep the 30 days up until the end of January or January 30, but in the same moment, we can make a decision on the January board meeting that if nothing changes in the last 10 days, move forward and delegate staff to do that. Correct? Okay.
Right.
Sounds
and then
like
I
a
could
plan.
make the updates based on the hearing and if the board approves them, and then it could go into effect February 1st and we could stay on our target deadline.
Yes.
And I don't think it would be too much of an issue to have the hearing the week before the board meeting. If we want competencies defined, that could be a lengthy discussion. I think the other definitions as far as directly involved and clarifying that the supervisor doesn't need to be present should be a pretty easy fix that we can adjust at the hearing, and we could just invite the RAC to the hearing to kind of have that conversation and kind of do it all at once instead of having a committee meeting and then the hearing and then all of that and asking for a greater time commitment from the volunteers. As competencies, I think, could be a longer term discussion. So I just want to bring that attention to the board that might be something that the board looks into down the line for the sake of getting this rule into effect with as much definitions as we can. I think that would be more appropriate than trying to define competencies in the short turnaround time.
I'd like to synthesize what I'm hearing, okay? And please help me out here. What I'm hearing here is you can have the RAC present during the hearing, and for the simple low fruit definitions, maybe we could wordsmith it at that point, modify it, and then on the meeting approve those. And where I'm pausing for a moment is the competencies, right? And I'm more inclined you don't want to open that can of worms and just blow it up, because I really want to land the plane and accept this rule. So I'd rather remain silent unless a person asks that question. And then the clarifying, everybody follow me so far where I'm going here? So the lower fruit definitions, the supervision, the things that mentions and so forth, I'm okay with that, with the RAC doing that, right? But really the end game here is I want this accepted and have at least a rule in place in February 1st. Unless somebody really has any concerns, please raise your hands now. But in terms of the competencies, that's just a bigger bite that I really think that should be more RAC involved. Any thoughts with what I've just mentioned right there? So we could be efficient with everything else, try to get everything done with a RAC involved in the hearing and wordsmithing and so forth. Or we can have the RAC just do that alone, right? And just accept this rule for public comment and let the RAC come back to us in subsequent meetings. That's what I'm thinking of. Am I lost there, Katrina? Am I just at this point?
No, I mean, what you're saying is there's a slightly shorter process, though the optics might not be perfect on that with the public in terms of, additional definition coming in after the rule is published. So the board could potentially today direct staff to go ahead with the rulemaking, publish the rule as is, adopt the rule as currently presented, and then at a later time, we would review the RAC definitions and the longer conversation on the competencies and make amendments to the rule at that time.
With my experience, if I may say, that's a lot cleaner. But if
Agreed.
anybody has a burning If anybody has a burning desire, I'd rather accept the rule unchanged than open the can of worms and allow the public, because it's what we can control. And there's a level of lack of, not that the public is welcome to make comment, right? But I'd rather just have one clean package, get it landed, and then we can have the rack and have that second process, right? That's what we need to, because then we won't get blindsided. And our goal here is to land this plane. So that being said, anybody having any concerns about just having the rack, which leads now to the next question. In this meeting, the rack is still there, pending if the chair of the rack doesn't want to continue, right? We have not dissolved the rack yet, so we don't even have to reform the rack. Correct, Katrina?
Yes.
Until the board says it is a done deal, the rack is still there, given the same charge, just with more clarifying questions. So we don't have to vote reforming the rack, correct, Katrina?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Side note, we just
So
had
that
someone join via phone, Rugi. If you wouldn't mind
I'd
just
like to acknowledge that.
identifying.
Yes. And
It's
who is
Deb
our new
Harris.
guest?
Deb Harris.
Okay,
Okay,
Deb, thank you.
All right. Anybody opposed to that? We're taking it in 2 steps, but it's a lot cleaner. There's a little bit more organization and less unanticipated outcomes. Anybody concerned about that? All right, so let's just review. We are going to move forward with this for public hearing, January 1st, Secretary of State. I think somebody wants to speak, but let me just finish and then I'll give you the floor. And then we will have the public comment and hearing before the meeting. We can then at that point delegate the staff, unless something significantly changed in the last days after the board meeting to January 30th. And then we can delegate the staff to basically put it under rule effective February 1st. And then in the same token, with the same breath, I don't know if we need 2 separate motions, one to accept and also one to have the rack continue with the new charges and definitions that was outlined in this public meeting. Somebody wanted to speak up, I guess. Go ahead, I'm giving you the floor. Once, going twice. Give you time to unmute. Anybody opposed to this? So first things first, and I'm very poor with names, and your name is not defined on the video. Would you be more than happy to serve as chair of the Rules Advisory Committee? For the record.
For the record, yes, I would love to continue to be the chair of the advisory board committee.
Thank you. I
And
appreciate
Serena
your time
Trexler.
and volunteer work. Yes, thank you. And again, I'm horrible with names. It's one of the things that dropped when you age. So that being said, do we do 2 motions to continue the rack and to accept? And I'm not making the motions. I cannot make the motions. Katrina, do we need to have 2 motions, or since we made a previous motion for the rack, we don't need to for the second one?
I think that you are directing staff to go ahead and publish the rule. I don't know that you need a vote to do that. It's direction from the board that to go ahead and start the formal rulemaking process. And with the rack, I'm not as familiar with racks either, but I think that you have not dissolved it. It is still in progress. So again, I think it's direction to the rack to go ahead and start work on the additional definitions that were discussed today. They'll have the benefit of the recording from this meeting to know what the concerns were and where the board was thinking of going, and that would be part of their sort of starting process and marching orders. So I think it's both of them are really board direction. I don't think votes are necessarily needed.
But just to codify it, because then at least we would know in this public meeting, it would not be inappropriate to at least vote to accept the rule as presented by RAC.
No, you can definitely do that. I was
I
just
would prefer
responding
that.
to you. Yes.
I would
that's
prefer that
fine.
if that's okay, just
Yes.
because then,
There's no reason not
because
to.
we are, this is a public meeting, right? This is a chance because we can't speak as one, right? I still want to put it under vote. So I would like somebody in the board to make a motion for me. Hopefully you guys heard me enough to have enough practice to vote on about what was presented by the Rules Advisory Committee. I need a volunteer. I cannot make the motion.
So moved.
For the record,
right.
who was that?
Deb Harris.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you. As written, no edits, correct? Ms. Harris?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And do I have a second?
Melissa, I'll second.
Thank you.
Unless you
Ms.
really want it,
Porter's-
Craig.
I don't care.
All right. So the motion is set. Any discussions? No discussions? All right. All in favor say aye.
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 Nays? All right. Nays? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Anything else in the agenda other than any reports from board members that they feel so to sorry, I didn't expect to run the show, right? There's nothing else in the agenda, right?
No, there's
Okay,
nothing
perfect.
else on today's agenda. You can amend the agenda if necessary, if there is something that needs to be discussed. But otherwise, no, you've completed the tasks that you're required to do, unless you also wanted to vote to continue the RAC, or was that included in the last vote? Sorry.
Nope. The RAC, I think, is not dissolved, and we have charge. Just for the record, it's all hopefully written down. I trust staff has put it down, and thank you very much again for the RAC for your time and work, and we value your work. And again, at the end of the day, it's protecting the public. And anybody at this point, just very briefly, wanted to report out any updates or anything? Any reports from the staff? I would like, it looks like Mallory has something that you'd like to, and I was about to say, I wanted to parse out the board and also the staff, which I always appreciate your work. Go ahead, Mallory.
Yes, so just so I'm clear, I will reach out to the RAC, let them know that the board accepted their rule as is. It will be posted in the January bulletin and go into effect February 1st. And then the RAC is to reconvene to define the four things we discussed, which I have on my list here, as directly involved, direct participation, only after receiving direction, and competencies.
There was one more, I think, that was added by Ryan.
I wanted to add arrangements. We don't define arrangements.
Defined.
Whether they should be online, allowing online, or a combination of online and in person, or just in person. Is that right, Ryan?
Right. I think there needs to at least be, if it's both, then we should list out that can mean both. But if it doesn't mean both, then again, we want to foresee that if we say it can be both and we don't say it has to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that somebody could essentially never meet with a single family in person, do everything online, never even talk to somebody, essentially, if they do it all virtually. And I'm wondering if that is the outcome that the board wants. That's all.
Well, that is for the RAC to recommend and for the board to accept.
Okay, we had one more person join via phone. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself.
This is Nancy Felton.
Hey Nancy, thank you for joining us. We're getting pretty close to wrapping up.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's fine.
No worries. One more quick question I had for the board is that are we looking, what is the timeline, if any, for the RAC to have these additional definitions? Are we hoping to present this, I would assume, at the April board meeting, or are we hoping to have this done quicker, to have another special board meeting like this to institute the further definitions?
My thoughts are, and Yeah, and that is exactly my thought. I think we have the groundwork and we're just polishing the edges, right?
Okay. Oh, you muted yourself, Rugi.
Uh-oh. Unless there's something in the public hearing that was brought up, okay?
Okay.
I think we're just polishing the edges. I think it can wait until April. I don't think there's anything compelling that needs to happen. Any comments from the group about what was said?
Agreed.
All right, that being said, anything else from staff? And I would like to acknowledge, welcome back, Chad. I didn't forget. We're glad that you're back. Any other comments from staff for the good of the order? All right, that being said, the time is 10:11 a.m. and the public session, the public meeting for this special meeting is now adjourned. Thank you very much.